what about the idea that I can take a job right now that doesn't have to be my long-term job?
Um,
Like, does that feel appropriate, or does that, like, am I way out in left field with that idea?
no, personally, I think it's really appropriate, and I think maybe this is a separate idea, but I think in a lot of ways, like the traditional like career where you go to work at the same place and stay there for 30 years is kind of disappearing
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people nowadays. But no, I think it's totally appropriate to take all kinds of jobs, even if you're not going to stay for a long period of time, right? Kind of falls in that same idea. Like, this isn't my career, but then I'm just choosing not to work at all, and then you don't have work experience, and it's hard to get a different job, maybe, or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because I worked lots of jobs that weren't even closely related to this in my life, right? I've done lots of retail, I've done movie theaters, and I
And
cleaned a golf course once, and like, uh, I actually ended up trying a job where I worked at a crisis home, which is in the same realm, I guess, as therapy, but it was through trying lots of jobs that I actually figured out what I wanted to do. And even once I knew that, I worked in multiple different jobs in that before I settled on doing this. I worked for a school district. I worked for a treatment center. I worked for Child Protective Services, um, which all could have been my career if I had decided to stick with it. But uh, if I wouldn't have just hopped around jobs a little bit, and almost like I hopped around jobs and it got narrower and narrower as I jumped through jobs until I kind of figured out what I liked. But does that make sense?
it does. And I actually, and I'm glad that that's how the answer came out. This is not scripted, right? But I'm
Yeah.
glad that that's how that came out, because I think that there's value in that, and I think that's the right way. Like, I worked in a grocery store. I worked as a custodian. I worked um, in a mental health facility. I internshipped at a residential program. I internshipped in a hospital. And so the back half of my career kind of formulated that. But I definitely had experience that was not this.
Yeah. And how sure were you about your career until you had worked a few different jobs?
Not.
Yeah, like I think most of us probably have an idea of what we want to do when we're like in high school, and then by the time you actually settle on doing maybe one specific thing, it's very different because maybe you tried a job that was related to that and you actually didn't like it, right? It's all theoretical until you actually go do it.
Uh-huh. Well, and it's interesting. So maybe this idea of I have to make the right choice, or I have to pick a career, I do see that overwhelming clients.
Yeah.
And I would say that that's probably not what needs to be done. And I'll share one little experience. Um, so I interned in a hospital. It was an inpatient psychiatric hospital. And I remember sitting around. So I had access to doctors, nurses, social workers, um, CNAs. So I had access to an entire treatment team of people, right? Um, and I remember one day I was on a geriatric unit in this hospital, and I was talking to a couple of the nurses at the nursing station. And one of them said to me, "Well, if you could do it all over again, would you pick the same career?"
Yeah.
And I made the comment that, well, I really love what I do, but if I knew then what I know now, I would probably go a mildly different direction. Same field, but mildly different, where I would become a nurse practitioner
Mm.
rather than a social worker. Um, and of course, I said that because they prescribe medications, which would be kind of convenient. Hey, I'm
Yeah.
sick. I'm going to write myself a
Sure.
prescription.
Yeah.
Although that may be frowned upon. Um,
Probably.
and then they make more money,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm very money focused and driven. And so I'll never forget what happened. As soon as I said that, the doctor was sitting at the nursing station, and she was like this old crotchety woman, and she stood up and she was like, "Don't you ever," and she launched into this monologue lecture, right? And she was the medical director of the hospital, and she had, I venture an age, low 70s, right?
Sure.
And she was kind of known for being ornery, but she really liked me for whatever reason. And um, what she then told me was she had gone to law school and practiced law until she was 42 years old. and decided she hated it. And so then she went back to med school at the age of 42. And now she was working as a medical director of a hospital. And it's funny because what I will sometimes tell clients when working with them about this idea of a career is, now that I've been doing this for almost a decade, I could see myself doing all kinds of things. I may not end my career as a therapist. I probably will, but I may not,
sure, yeah.
you know? And so I think it just speaks to this idea that what you decide today, it does not have to be a final decision.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think, when I think about it, it's almost like years have more weight when you're younger, right? Like,
yeah.
When I think of if I wanted to go to medical school when I was 20, like, oh my gosh, I won't be done till I'm 28 or 30 or whatever. That's a long time, right? But if I were to decide now, I'm like, okay, maybe I do want to go back to school and get a PhD. But if I went when I was like 45, and I'm like, oh, I'll be done by the time I'm 48.
Done.
That's easy. That's not that long, right? And
That's true.
It's almost like as you get older, the years have like a little less weight to them. But that leads me to another, I guess, good point about maybe like related to this. Do you think anyone works a job or a career that they're like, yep, I wouldn't change a thing about this. This is perfect?
There's got to be someone.
Sure.
Right? There has to be. But even then, like, they may love their career, but there's things they would do different.
Yeah. And because when you said, like, when they ask you, is there anything you do? Yeah, I do some things different or whatever. I think that's normal. I don't think anyone went to school and got a job and is like, yep, everything about this is exactly what I hoped it would be.
Well, it's funny because I find now, well into my career, like, I wish I would have done, and I find myself saying all the things people told me to do.
Sure.
Right? Like, don't worry that it's going to be 7 years of schooling. Because not only has those 7 years passed, but I've been in my career longer than that. And I miss being in school. Now, it's hard to miss school when you're in it. 'Cause it's really demanding, right? Yeah. But any chance I get invited to go back up to a campus, and whether I'm presenting or rubbing shoulders with people, like, I have so much fun.
Yeah.
I do remember calling a guy once when I first bought my house to come out and just run through the sprinklers, make sure everything was okay. And I asked him if he liked his job. He's like, dude, I hate my job. And I'm like, well, why are you still doing it? And he's like, 12 more years until retirement. And I'm just like, no, like,
yeah.
Why suck it up for 12 years of your life doing something that you hate? Now, I think there's a lot that goes into that.
Sure.
I grew up in an environment that was conducive to, if you hate being a therapist at the age of 42, then go do something different. I'm not 42 currently.
But when you get there, you could change careers.
That's right. Yeah. And I think some people maybe were not in an environment where it teaches them that they have the power and the capacity to do that. But I think that's maybe the point of this episode of the podcast. You know, if you have a belief that it's going to be a final, or that you have to pick the right one because you might make the wrong decision. I think that's the idea of this episode, is some of these thoughts that we have, they don't actually have to be true. You can do anything you want at any age that you want. That's not to say it won't be a headache.
Sure.
I'm sure a PhD...
It's probably hard to go back to school when you're 87.
Or if you've got a family with 5 kids running around, it's harder to do a PhD like that. But it can be totally done.
Sure.
Right? Anyway, other thoughts?
No, I mean,
Or what are the takeaway points? Like,
yeah.
What are the bullet points on this?
I always think, like, and maybe this is just my attitude, but, like, not everything needs to be so serious, right? Take a job. If you don't like it, you can find another job. Go to school. If you need to change majors, change your major. You know, all of these things that at least you're trying things and trying to learn new skills. And if you do a job or get into a career and you learn that you don't like it, great. You've learned something, and now you can refine and go to something you like more. But doing and learning and failing is okay, and it's better than doing nothing.
Which is so funny, because that's what I find myself saying now. But when I was at that age, it kind of goes back to those years past, right?
It's easy for me to say now that I'm finished with school and have a job, but it definitely didn't feel that way.
Yeah. I was tired of eating top ramen.
Yeah.
I was tired of eating frozen burritos, although I still like them now, you know. So maybe some of the bullet points are shift away from right and wrong and better to better or worse. Is there a job that suits you better right now?
Yeah.
Probably.
Sure.
Right? Maybe this idea that the decisions that you make now are not final. So whatever you choose today doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be doing that in 20 years. Unless you fix sprinklers, because apparently that's...
then you're stuck. Yeah.
He did a lot more than that. That was his side hustle.
Sure.
Right? And then the other one that you mentioned was, you've got the finality piece, you can make adjustments piece. It may also be a headache.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So if you make a choice, there will be a headache. There was one other good one that you said. And as soon as we end this, I'll think about it.
I don't even remember. Doing something and...
That's it. Doing something is more important than making the right decision.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Whether it's fixing sprinklers or going to school, just do something, because that alone is going to help build the foundation of skills for you to build on.
Yeah.
So.
And if you really are concerned about making the decision's a lot easier to make with some experience rather than just guessing.
Gosh, that's like a mic drop.
I don't know about that. Well, thanks everybody for joining us for today's episode. Hopefully something you learned was helpful. If you've enjoyed this series, please like and subscribe and comment. We'd love to talk about your questions or concerns, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, guys.